whatever for would he be doing that? And the reason is because until February 14th in Parkland, Florida, many people saw students, in particular those students, but millennials, as people who are forever on their phones, who are forever taking selfies, who are forever following Kim Kardashian, God only knows why. But I'm here to tell you that there's something different going on. I got here a little late tonight because I teach a course at the University of Michigan Dearborn called Corporate Social Responsibility. The students that I teach are seniors in college. And I want you to know that they do more than take selfies. They really do have a purpose. And they know that they have a purpose these days. And that purpose for them is not simply graduation. It's not simply how do I pay off my student debt, but more importantly, it's how do I become involved in the political life of our state and the political life of our country. And so I spend time with these students, and one of the things I say to them is what matters to you? And what I'm hearing more and more, it's like a return to the early 1960s. It's service. What do I do to provide a service to my community, to my state, to my country? Some of you may be old enough to remember President Kennedy's inauguration. And
ask not.
Yes, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And so I'm here tonight to talk with you about purpose and service. We've passed out a little bit of a sheet that'll give you some biographical information on you. So I'm not going to talk about me. In fact, that's probably the biggest problem we have today with politics and politicians is they talk about me. Me, my, I. In fact, some of you may have heard a politician say, I alone. You know who I'm talking about. Well, that's not what it's about. And when I look at where we are in Michigan today, I don't want to look at it from the perspective of everything is bleak, everything is bad, because it isn't. Anybody who lived through the 1960s and on into the 1970s, even into the 1980s, we know that things could be a lot worse. So what I want to share with you tonight is three things. As I campaign for Attorney General around the state of Michigan, there are three things that I focus in on. The first one is trust. The second one is transparency. And the last one is, what are we going to do with that man in the White House and his administration? So I just want to talk to you briefly about trust. It seems that we have a lack of trust in our government. I live in Detroit, and during the last election in Detroit, only 21% of the people came out and voted. That says to me that there's a lack of trust in the people that are elected that have so much say about how we live. And I've seen that in Flint, as I've traveled to Flint on numerous occasions. There's a lack of trust, and deservedly so. If your water has been poisoned and no one has taken proper responsibility for it, and even today, 4 years after the event, many people in Flint can't get the medical care that they need and are sick and or dying. We have to rebuild the trust in our government. And one way I can do that as Attorney General is this. The investigation that was conducted into the Flint matter is incomplete. It doesn't go far enough. I've been part of an investigation at the highest level in the United States government. I was involved in the prosecution of the Secretary of Agriculture of the United States. And as part of that investigation and prosecution, we actually went all the way into the White House to determine whether there was culpability on the part of any of the officials in the White House. After conducting the investigation, we determined that there was no culpability on the part of anybody inside the White House. It simply rested with the Secretary of Agriculture himself. Well, here in Michigan, that investigation, it's, I don't know, sort of truncated. It didn't get at the chief of staff of the governor. It didn't get at the lieutenant governor. It didn't get at the governor to determine whether they played any role in what happened in Flint. It got cut off with the emergency managers and the poor guy who was in charge of health and human services. Well, one of the things that I would promise the people of Flint and the people of Michigan is that we would pick up where that investigation should go and take it all the way back into the governor's office. And if there's no culpability there, I'll be the first person to say there isn't. But if there is, I will be the first person to watch as the then former governor is perp walked. And I don't say that lightly. I've been a prosecutor. But the fact of the matter is if he's culpable, then he should be held responsible. That's how you begin to restore trust in government. People who are responsible, if they're getting the paycheck, they need to be held accountable. Second thing, transparency. When we talk about government, there was a study done in 2015, Center for Public Integrity. Of the 50 states in the United States in terms of openness of government and transparency, Michigan ranked dead last. Which means we're behind Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, and we know how radically progressive those states are. And the reason is this, is that you can't even FOIA, Freedom of Information, you can't make a Freedom of Information Act request of the legislature because they're exempt. You can't make a Freedom of Information Act request of the governor's office because it's exempt. So how do we know what they're doing? We should have the ability to look into those offices and determine what are they doing. And so one of the things that I would do is I would press either through litigation or through opinion or through just jawboning folks. We need to make sure that our government is open to us. I mean, ask yourself this question, because this is something you deal with each and every day. Where'd the road money go? As I'm dodging potholes on I-96, which was renovated 2.5 years ago, I want to know, where did the money go? So we need to open up government so people can see. And the best way to do that is to elect people who are going to be open and honest with you. No ducking and dodging. But then you also need to put the guardrails of law in place to make sure that that happens. The last thing, because I know y'all have been here for a while. What are we going to do about that man in Washington sitting in the White House and the things that he's doing to our country? Anybody here on Medicare and Medicaid?
Yeah.
Well, he signed an executive order that eliminates the subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. That is what allowed the state of Michigan to expand Medicare and Medicaid to an additional 600,000 plus people. Without those subsidies, and nobody's really talking about this, Medicare and Medicaid for many of those people will go bye-bye. It's gone. When we look to what's happening in the environment, 21% of the world's fresh water surrounds Michigan. But yet, people in Detroit can't afford it. People in Oscoda, people in Marquette apparently are being poisoned by toxic chemicals that former military bases have leached into the groundwater. And we have a president who says there's no such thing as climate change. Well, I certainly would work with the other attorneys general of the Great Lakes region to make sure that we protect our fresh water and that we do what we need to do. In fact, President Trump has reduced the funding for the Great Lakes that we depend on. The last thing I want to leave you with is when I think about the values, and I'm not talking about family values, I'm not getting into that. But what I'm talking about is the values that we have held dear for so very, very long. He wears a hat that says MAGA, Make America Great Again. I say we should change the meaning of that G. Make America generous again. Because we have always been a generous nation in terms of the values that we hold dear. We've been generous in education, and I don't know if we can say that about Betsy DeVos. We've been generous in terms of expanding the right to vote since 1920. None of you women would be able to vote but for that amendment. And that came under a Democratic president, despite the fact that he was probably one of the biggest racists ever. He was not a reformed man, Woodrow Wilson, but we got reformation in the vote. And we've seen that all along. And so part of it is that, I don't know about you, I've come too far to turn around. If it wasn't for the Civil Rights Act, if it wasn't for the Voting Rights Act, if it wasn't for education that had been provided after the Korean War, I wouldn't be in front of you today. Because I grew up in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. where I wasn't supposed to be much of anything. But I was able, with the help of good neighbors, my mother, my father, the people with those generous values, to go to college at Notre Dame, go to graduate school and law school at the University of Chicago. And I just want to let you know, many people don't know the University of Chicago. It's one of the finest law schools in America. In fact, there's somebody who taught there that you all know, President Barack Obama. I also taught there. So I come before you with extensive experience, and I care about the direction of our state, and I believe that I can make a big difference as the Attorney General of the state of Michigan. And one other thing, I don't want to run for any other office after that. This is a one-time deal because I think I can make a difference there. And after, I just turned 61 recently, and I'll tell you what, one term, maybe 2 terms, and then it's bye. So my name is Bill Noakes, candidate for Attorney General. Thank you very much for your patience.